This happened about 2 years into my life living alone as an adult female. I was working crazy hours. I wasn't getting enough sleep. It was pretty tough. I used to pretty much sleep all weekend, and then start it all again on Monday. So one weekday night, I got back home late, as usual. I took a bath. Took a look at the time. It was already past midnight. After the bath, I thought I'd better go to the toilet before going to sleep. When I think back to this, I remember at this moment, I felt something was off. You know that feeling when you think something is out of place? I was doing my thing in there, and I was about to get up and leave, when I saw something that made me freeze in place. There was a gap between the floor and the door of about a couple of centimeters, maybe about an inch in height. I saw a shadow pass in front of the door. I thought, because I was tired, maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But a moment or two later, it happened again. I couldn't explain it. There was nothing in the hallway that could cast a shadow back and forth, and I wasn't living with anyone. It happened a third time. Chills raced up my spine. I pressed my ear to the door. I couldn't hear any movement, only a dull hum, like a kind of noise, which I guessed was the ventilation fan in the kitchen. Hang on a second. That's not the fan. I didn't even put it on. When I listened closer, I could hear that it was the sound of someone breathing. There was someone stood in front of the toilet. I was panicking. I knew it wasn't the thick door. My heart was beating fast and I began to sweat. I thought there was a thief out there, but my thoughts drifted towards the paranormal. I had no idea. My brain was full of images from horror films. I didn't know what I could do. I just curled up as far away from the door as possible and kept silent. A shadow occasionally passed back and forth. What did this thing or person want, I wondered. Then suddenly, there was a loud bang, and the light in the toilet was cut. A whimper of fear just escaped out of me. I backed myself up as far as I could in the toilet, and cocked my fist back, trying my best to prepare myself, to at least put up a fight against this intruder. I was shaking with adrenaline and fear. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness as I stared at the door. The doorknob slowly started to turn. They were trying to open the door. I grabbed onto the handle with both hands and put all my strength into keeping the door closed. The door handle began to violently turn in my hands. I held on as best I could. Whoever was trying to get in was incredibly strong. I knew I needed to take one hand off the door handle to lock the toilet door, but would I have the strength to keep this person out one-handed? I whipped my left hand onto the lock and scrabbled to lock it. The most satisfying sound I think I've ever heard. Then the doorknob ceased shaking. My apartment went back to silence. I froze in place. Sweat was dripping down my forehead. Still silence filled my apartment. Did you give up? I thought. I stood as still as possible for I guess about 15 minutes, and I didn't hear another sound. Was it safe to come out now? I had no confidence in that decision. I thought I'd check the crack of the door to see if there was still a shadow there, but it was pitch black. I wanted to see if someone was out there. I had to. I got down on the floor and put my head near the crack. I was terrified. I lined my eyes up with the gap and saw a pair of eyes peering back at me. I just remained silent, unsure what else I could have done. I didn't leave the toilet. I couldn't. I just had to stay there. I didn't have a phone, so I couldn't call the cops. It was just a waiting game. If whoever was out there wanted to get in, they could have probably done it by now, I thought. I was so exhausted I caught some micro-sleep leaning against the toilet. I woke up to sunlight filtering through the gap in the door. I was thinking that whoever was out there was gone, and I had to get to work. I couldn't stay in the fucking toilet for the rest of my life, so I threw the door open. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and checked my apartment out. No one was there. My cupboards and drawers had been ransacked, but I don't think anything had been taken. Maybe one of my bags? Or some underwear. It was a horrible situation. In the end, I decided to take the day off, and I started apartment hunting. I still have no idea how they got in. Maybe, in my tired state, I didn't lock the door or something. Please, guys, stay safe. I think I had a narrow miss here. I went to a party. It was a mixer. I was a single guy and I had hopes of meeting a woman, but I struck out and went home alone. I had a few drinks, but I was nowhere near drunk. Bit of a bad night, but oh well. I'd missed the last train of the night. I needed to get back to the other side of Osaka. I had work early in the morning. I was really disappointed that I missed my train. I didn't see a single taxi on the street. I started walking in the general direction of my side of town. I had been walking for some time, occasionally turning towards the oncoming traffic with my thumb out just to see if anyone would give me a ride, but I was getting nowhere. It was really dark, and the longer I walked, the fewer cars passed me by. I was getting pretty worried. I kept glancing over my shoulder to see if anyone was following me, but thankfully, I was alone. I'd given up with the hitchhiking idea at this point. A dark grey van was rumbling along the road behind me. It passed me, and then slowed down to a stop. I saw the silhouette of the driver, and the passenger side window glide down. I stopped walking, and I just stood there behind the van. I could see the driver leaning towards the passenger window. I think they were saying something, but I couldn't hear it over the hum of the engine. "Over here," I heard her say. I shook my head to indicate that I hadn't heard what she was saying. "Know where street is?" She was asking for directions, but I still hadn't heard her. Something about this was off. It was really late at this point too. I leaned a little closer to the window. She had long dark hair and a very pale complexion. She was wearing a white blouse. She was a beauty. "Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Where are you trying to go?" I asked. She smiled and said, "Why don't you climb in?" Whoa! I didn't know what to say. I was flattered. I struck out earlier, but maybe my luck with the ladies was about to turn. I needed to be cautious, though. "I thought you just wanted directions," I asked. "Just get in. I want to talk to you a bit. Let me ask you something." "Well, I can hear you from here," I said, keeping my guard up. "Don't be like that. I just want to talk to you," she said. "About what?" I asked. She started to unfasten the top button of her blouse. "Get in and find out," she said as she unfastened another. "Aw, please," she whined. "What are you scared of?" she cooed as she unfastened more and more buttons. "I don't think so," I said. "Aren't you lonely? Out here walking by yourself? Don't you need a ride home?" "No, I gotta go," I said firmly. She kept going, revealing more and more to me. "Will you get in now?" "No thanks," I mumbled. My willpower was crumbling at this offer of a ride, and most likely more. Just barely audible, I heard a noise over the sound of the engine, and I'm sure hearing this saved my life that night. I heard some laughter somewhere behind her in the van. I knew it definitely wasn't her laugh, because it sounded deeper. It sounded like there was men back there. I ran as fast and as far as I could, through as many back alleys as I could find. I got to the train station and called a taxi from a phone booth. Be careful out there, guys. So this happened a few years back. You might want to strap yourselves in for this one. I'm from Japan and I want to tell you a story about a couple I used to work with. Do you guys know what Yandere means? It's a term we use in Japan to describe someone who appears friendly, loving and kind, but towards their crush or partner, they act obsessive and violent.
so I don't know why I'm sparing her by granting her anonymity. But I don't know the legality of posting full names online, so let's just call her A. I don't really want her to read this and find her way back to me either. A was really cute, great figure, and she was a real little devil, if you know what I mean. Her favorite color was pink. She always wore pink. We worked together and she was super popular at work. She made everyone smile, and no one had a bad word to say about her. All the guys wanted to date her. She started seeing this guy at work who we'll call B. B is a really nice guy who's cool and he had a decent personality. They made a good couple. They seemed really head over heels for one another. Everybody was happy for them. Anyways, I quit that job and found another one and became estranged from the old crew I used to work with. About 6 months later, I went on a night out with some colleagues from my new job, and we were joining some of her friends for a drink, and I bumped into A, just like the old days, I thought. Seems like A and B are still together. She was entertaining a group of her friends.
A doesn't last long with me,
she said. What the fuck, that's pretty weird. She kept poking fun at him.
But if he ever tried to leave me, I'd kill him,
she said while smiling. I took this as a joke, as I guessed it was intended that way, but I quickly learned that that wasn't true.
We once had this fight, and he was stupid enough to say that he was gonna leave me,
she began.
Well, I guess he got a bit heated and a bit jealous because I stayed overnight with a friend. Maybe he had someone else lined up. Well, I needed to find out, so I head over to his house. But just to show him I'm serious, I bring a knife from the kitchen.
Gasps everywhere from her gal pals. A doesn't give a flicker of recognition to her friend's shock. She just continues with her story.
I stood outside his place, considering how to deal with him. I thought I'd kill him at first, but then I remembered how much I loved him, so I didn't. I just let it be.
Whoa, close one there, one of her friends say.
Not really. I've stabbed him with a pair of scissors before. Well, he didn't pick up the phone when I called him. And the other day, he asked me to leave his apartment after we got in the big fight. He locked me out. So I go ahead and bang on the door because, he can't do that to me. He wouldn't come out though. I guess he underestimated me, so I tried to break his door down with a fire extinguisher. That tired me out and he really wasn't worth the effort, to be honest. He left the window open, so I took my chance and I just emptied that fire extinguisher right into his apartment.
The atmosphere changed at this point. Not even her weird gal pals were cheering her on anymore. She's deadly, I heard one mutter. She awkwardly smiled, and someone else changed the subject. So about a month after this, some people from work were planning another big hangout. Same crowd too. On the way to the restaurant, I spotted someone who looked the spitting image of B. You know, A's boyfriend. He looked really depressed. So I walked into the restaurant where we were all scheduled to meet, and I mentioned to A that I thought I had seen B outside. Hey, I saw B out there. He was looking pretty down. Did you guys break up or something? She stared at me and quickly asked,
Where did you see him? What time? What clothes was he wearing?
I didn't know what to say to this, but I knew better than to lead her to him. Maybe it was just someone who looked like him, I said.
I see,
she replied. I wanted to know more, so I asked.
B kind of disappeared on me. He was sick of my antics. I wasn't ready for things to end though, so I went in search of him. I headed to his apartment. He never answered the door and there were never any lights on in his apartment either. I didn't see him anywhere. Even when I was staking the place out, no one entered or left that apartment. It was odd, so I hired a private detective. I managed to track him down. Well, his parents anyway. So I left them lots of notes, called them a lot, just made my feelings clear. I told them to tell their son not to leave me. I guess as soon as he got my messages via his parents, he disappeared completely, because I haven't been able to track him down, and I can't get anywhere near his parents again.
Since I've heard from another friend that B is actually doing well. He's living somewhere new, but unfortunately he has a bit of a distrust in women. This happened when I was little, when I went to visit my grandparents. We always visit them for Obon. It was nothing like the big city. I could run around and immerse myself in nature, playing in rice paddies and chasing bugs. My brother and I loved it there. We would play all day. One morning, the sun had climbed high into the noon sky. Then suddenly, an ill wind blew. I don't know how else to explain it. The sun seemed to stand still staring at us. Then the wind ceased altogether. My brother complained and looked as confused as I did. Then I noticed he was looking off in another direction. He was staring at a scarecrow in one of the nearby fields. "Why are you staring at that thing?" I asked my brother. He didn't look at me. He just strained his eyes and said, "Not the scarecrow. Behind it." I looked for myself. I scanned my eyes over the field. Then I saw something. It was obvious what he was staring at now. It was so far away I couldn't make out what it was. It was like a human, but entirely white. It was wriggling off in the distance. Its movement was kind of worm-like. There was no one else nearby. There was nothing around for miles, just my grandparents' house and rice fields. It was pretty weird, but I wanted to make sense of it, so I tried to explain it to my brother. "Must be some sort of new scarecrow, you know, the ones that move by themselves? Farmer put it there, I reckon." "Oh, I guess it moves when the wind blows." My brother smiled in agreement with me, but only for a second. The wind was still, yet that thing was moving. "It's still moving," my brother said. "Wait here," he called as he ran back to our grandparents' house. He returned a few moments later with a pair of binoculars in hand. My brother was pretty fired up about whatever this thing was. He called out to me once he arrived back. "I'm looking first, then you get a turn, okay?" He put the binoculars to his eyes, like he had seen something terrible. The color from his cheeks began to fade. I watched on with horror as sweat dripped down his face. Then suddenly, he dropped the binoculars. What's wrong?" I asked. "You're better off not knowing." That wasn't my brother's voice. My brother turned and walked back to our grandparents' house without saying another word. I slowly picked up the binoculars, determined to look for myself, but I was scared. I didn't know if my curiosity would outweigh my fear. It was weird. When my brother and I looked at that thing from a distance, we were fine, but something happened when he looked at it through the binoculars. The curiosity was gnawing at me. It was unbearable. What was that thing? I needed to know. What kind of thing scared my big brother? If you're that scary, I'll just have to see for myself, I thought, as I drew the binoculars to my eyes. At that moment, my grandfather came rushing over. "Don't look at that white thing," he called. "Did you look at it? Did you look through the binoculars, did you?" Shocked, I replied, "Not yet." "Good," my granddad boomed. He looked as if he was on the verge of tears. He took me back to the house. I was so confused. He didn't explain anything to me, but got me out of there as soon as possible. I felt like I was going to be in so much trouble, and I was a sniveling mess. When I got back to the house, everyone around was in tears. I thought it might be because they were worried about me, but soon I found out that something was up with my brother. He was shaking around like mad, flapping like a fish, giggling to himself. He looked like that thing we saw in the field. My grandmother said, "It's best he stays with us for a while. He's going to be like this for some time." I screamed when I heard this. When I looked a little closer at his strange, wiggling, laughing disposition, I saw he had tears in his eyes. All this because he looked at that thing through the binoculars? "Someday you'll come back," I called as the car pulled away. We visited each year, but a sinking realization that that thing writhing on the floor and inanely laughing was no longer my brother set in. This was years ago. I'm an adult now. I have my own family. I still see my bro from time to time, and unfortunately, he hasn't changed much. My children love to see their uncle, even though they can't understand his behavior. Actually, we were looking over the fields we used to play in. I missed him so much. My son was gazing across the fields. I was playing with my daughter a few 100 feet away. I looked over at him. He had a familiar stare of curiosity on his face. I was struck by sudden nostalgia. He grabbed something from his cargo shorts, something black, and brought it to his eyes. I raced over and batted the binoculars from his hands. I hope I made it in time.
This happened when I was in my final year of university. It started when I got a weird call from my best friend. 2 weeks prior to the call, we had gone camping with some other friends. I hadn't heard a word from him since the camping trip, which was weird because we were best friends. When he called me, he seemed to be frightened of something. Something strange was happening. He didn't seem his usual self. When I asked him what was wrong, he just said, "She's coming." Of course, I didn't know what the hell he was on about. I did think he was pranking me for a bit there, but there was something in his voice that made me decide to pay him a visit, just to check on him. I got to his dorm, rang the doorbell, but he didn't answer. So I banged on the door and told him it was me. Finally, he came and opened up the door. He didn't look great. It had only been 2 weeks since I had seen him, but he looked very pale and a lot thinner. I asked him what the phone call was about and who the woman was he spoke of. He said it was the young woman we met by the river when we were camping. Let me just explain. On the day we camped, we were drinking. I guess it was about 9:30 when our other friend said, "Hey, let's get down by the river." Since it was hot, we guessed being by the river might be a bit cooler, and at least we could keep the beers cool in the water. By the riverside was a woman with long black hair in a white one-piece dress. She sat gripping her knees to her chest, watching the flowing river. When I think about it now, we should have noticed that was a bit odd, if not creepy, but at the time we were pretty hammered and didn't have our wits about us. My best friend, who was now a petrified mess, called out to her, "Hey, you're so cute, love. Why don't you come and hang out with us?" The woman lifted her head and stared at him, which drove him crazy. She wasn't interested in his drunken catcalling. She just got up and disappeared somewhere. Now, my friend was stating that this woman was appearing in his room. I simply did not believe this was possible. But what was real was the look of fear and horror on his face. I didn't like seeing him like that, so I stayed over to keep an eye on him. Night approached. We had dinner about 7:30. We watched TV. Everything was fine, just as I thought. Then 9:30 hit. The doorbell rang. My friend didn't move or give any sign he was about to answer the door. He just shut his eyes and began to shiver. I wondered who it was, so I called out to him. "She's here," he muttered. I began to shiver too, because we hadn't answered the doorbell. Heavy thuds hammered against the door. Again, ignored that. I was pretty creeped out at this point. I didn't want to open the door, plus it wasn't my apartment either. The banging finally ceased. I thought that whoever was out there must have left. I got the nod from my friend to go over and check. I was freaking out as I approached the door. I unlocked it and looked. There was just a huge pool of water in front of my friend's door. There was no other water pools anywhere else in the apartment block's corridors. I broke out in goosebumps. Surely, this can't be happening. I stayed up as late as I could for something else to happen, but nothing did, so I went to sleep. Chalked it up as a coincidence. I had such horrendous nightmares about the river, that strange woman, and what might have happened to her. I woke up in the middle of the night when I was almost certain water was dripping on me, only to find out it was my own tears. It was pitch black in my friend's room, and I seriously felt some sort of malevolent presence there. I screwed my eyes as tightly shut as I could manage, and prayed when I opened them, the woman from my nightmares and the river wouldn't be looming over me. After a while, I felt the oppressive atmosphere lift, and I felt at ease. I managed to fall back to sleep. In the morning, we called our other friend and decided we had to do something for my friend. We did all the usual things, like putting salt around all the exits and entrances to his apartment, and we even took him to see a priest in a nearby shrine. So far, things are going well. But I'm not sure if we can completely repel this spirit. But I am having less nightmares, and my friend is more talkative these days.